to push, locally for their governors to maybe request a constitutional convention.
I did not hear the show, and that was Dr. Wynn Parker.
Okay. Hopefully, for those that were listening to your show on that day, hopefully, they won't do it. In fact, they'll do the opposite. And please allow me to explain. The socialist, globalist, and special interests to boot, they've been pushing for this for quite some time. And they have 32 of the 34 states that they need to convene a constitutional convention now. Ohio almost became number 33. And, to make a long story short, if they get this thing to go through, if they get to 34, they can completely rewrite the Constitution any way they want to.
Well, as Bob said earlier, we're way past due for the revolution. John, hold on a second. 800-313-9443. We'll be right back.
You're tuned in to the National Intel Report, the Real Talk Radio Show.
Before I forget again, what I was going to say is people had questions about their falling home prices. And on this program, I suggested that they get out of that thing, sell it for what they could, let the bank take it back, whatever. But if you had the opportunity to sell, even though that it wasn't close to market price and you weren't too far upside down in your home, that it would quickly become a buyer's market. You'd have to downsize, of course, but some people have actually done that. They went to their families, their relatives. They holed up for a while, got rid of their property, moved into another property, smaller, of course, as I said. But some of these people now own their homes free and clear. It was a fancy way of get out of debt type of thing rather than just walking away from everything. And no matter what equity you might have into your house, and that's a joke, equity. You buy a house, your property falls 50%, so that means what? And how many years did you pay interest on that? And your supposed equity into your castle up and disappeared. John in Arizona, any financial points here?
Financial? No, sir, at least not today. You guys have covered what, Robbie brought up the financials earlier at the beginning. And pretty much I was watching that today. And, you got to hand it to Mr. Geithner. His little magic worked.
Yeah. Well, it's not going to work.
At least short term.
Well, it's not even going to work short term. These banks are, Bob. These guys can lie. These guys can lie with impunity. And what I'm reading here, and this is pretty heavy stuff. J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Fannie Mae, they've all stepped up their foreclosure activity. Delinquencies, they're skyrocketing, foreshadowing more price slashing in the foreseeable future. According to a Wall Street Journal article, Ronald Temple, co-director of research at Lazard Asset Management, expects home prices to fall another 22 to 27% from their January levels. He says more than 2.1 million homes will be lost this year. Borrowers can't meet the loan payments, and that's up from 1.7 in 2008. Another 20% carved off the aggregate. The value of the U.S. housing means another $4 trillion, as you mentioned, Robbie, earlier. Another $4 trillion loss to homeowners. That means smaller retirement savings, less discretionary spending, and lower living standards. The next leg down in housing will be excruciating. Every sector will feel the pain. And Mr. Obama, Barry Sartoro there, his $75 billion mortgage rescue plan is a mere pittance. It won't reduce the principal on mortgage, and it won't stop the bleeding. And this moratorium, folks, guys, they're using terms moratorium. Well, that's just saying that we're going to put off doing what we're going to do to you in the future. There's not going to be any bailouts here. There's not going to be any people saved in their homes, to remortgage or refinance or at a lower rate. It doesn't matter because people are losing their jobs. I mean, they can't cash in their welfare stamps to make payments on a home. They've got to eat. They got to heat. They got to put gas in their car. They got to live, but it's not going to be possible because the job rate loss is accelerating. Bob, you had some figures in your this week's newsletter. Supposedly, the unemployment rate is slowing.
No, not in California.
Not in Arizona.
Not anywhere.
Not here in Texas. Not certainly.
No, but I think the unemployment rate next year will slow, but not this year. It'll probably. I've got it on the U6 at 19.2%. And John Williams, have you had him on your show?
No.
Oh, if you ever can get him on, do so. He's great. His stuff is really even better than mine. And he's got it at 19.8%. Now, I'm looking for 22% plus before the end of the year, calendar year. And so that puts unemployment at 22 to 25%. Because of the money being spent in the stimulus plan next year, plus all the money that's into the system, I think the banks are going to start doing some lending next year more than they have been. And if that happens, the unemployment drop will probably stagnate for a year, and the economy will continue to deteriorate, but it'll be very imperceptible, and the minus GDP will come down from minus 6.3% for the fourth quarter of last year, first quarter of this year. It'll come down to minus 2 to 4 by the end of this year, and probably be even next year. That doesn't mean it's a recovery. It's just like a rally in the stock market in a bear market. And in the following year, unless they pour in another $13 to $15 trillion, there'll be a collapse. And unemployment will go to 35-40%.
Well, then work this into, obviously, the meetings that's taking place in Washington this week that nobody seems to want to talk about, and that's the IMF meeting.
Well, the IMF is going to tell you that they're beating their chest now, and they're consorting with the Planet of the Apes or something, and that they're going to be the grand poobahs of international finance. And anybody who's on the inside, who understands the inside, know that that's not the way it's going to be at the moment, at least. Using SDRs is another fiat currency. It'll be used between countries and not on the street, so to speak. And it'll never be the international currency. It's just another stopgap measure of creating money out of thin air internationally. Which brings up another question. If the IMF is capable of doing that, and they are, and those SDRs, special drawing rights, were formed over 50 years ago, and they were unsuccessful, incidentally, why would the IMF want to sell gold when they can make money up anytime they want? Good question, huh?
Well, sure, but they just, you know this, Bob. I mean, they pull out that old tired story every time gold starts breaking above 200-day moving averages to keep it in the box.
Mm-hmm.
Bob, did you catch this UK story? The British economy falls into deflation for the first time since 1960?
That's right. And, you know, the figures are even worse in Spain. And they'll be followed up very quickly by Ireland and Greece, Luxembourg, of all places, Portugal. They're all in the same boat. And with the members of the European, the Eurozone, I should say, which excludes excludes Luxembourg. I don't think Luxembourg, is Luxembourg in the Eurozone? I don't think so.
I don't think it is.
But anyway, it just goes to show you one interest rate continues to not fit all. And you're either going to do one or two things here. And I wrote about this today for tomorrow's issue. The European, the central bank has brought interest rates down, but not nearly as much as England, the United States as an example, and Switzerland, which are close to zero. They're still at 1.5%. And at the same time, they didn't increase money and credit, M3 or M4, depending upon which country you're talking about. And the United States is up 18%, England's up 18.8%, but the European Central Bank only has been increasing money and credit by 6.8%. So what they've done here is they've got in the middle. In other words, they didn't purge the system, and they didn't go along with the U.S.-UK game of zero interest rates and creating rampant money supply. So they're in no man's land. They missed the boat. The Europe is falling apart.